My name is Joan. I am 69 years old. There are days I feel younger than that, when I'm elbow deep in flour making my cinnamon rolls, or pulling weeds from the stubborn edge of the garden that refuses to stay neat. And then there are mornings when the ache in my knees and the quiet hum of loneliness remind me exactly how long I've been on this earth. I live alone now, in a modest house just a 10-minute walk from my daughter's place. It's the same house I moved into 34 years ago when my daughter Miranda was just starting school. It was a fixer-upper back then, and I fixed it. Alone. There was no one else to help because there never really was anyone else. Miranda's father left before her second birthday. Just a goodbye note on the kitchen counter and a void in the air that never quite filled. I didn't cry when I found it. Not then, anyway. There was too much to do. Raising Miranda became my world. I worked nights cleaning offices so I could walk her to school in the mornings. I skipped lunches to afford her piano lessons she never really liked, but I thought would give her a leg up. I learned to sew so she'd have dresses for picture day. I bought the cheapest groceries and clipped every coupon, just so she'd never feel the gap between us and the other families on our block. But I never wanted anything in return. That's not how I was raised. My own mother taught me that love is something you give without asking. You stir it into soups and tuck it into lunch boxes. You stitch it into hymns and whisper it in goodnight stories. So I gave, and when Miranda had Sophie, my granddaughter, I gave more. I remember the night Sophie was born. It was storming, one of those dramatic spring rains that rattled the windows and made the house feel both cozy and cut off. Miranda called me at 1:17 a.m., her voice tight with pain and panic. "It's happening, Mom. I think it's time." I was there within 12 minutes. I don't remember grabbing my raincoat. I just remember running, heart first. At the hospital, I waited through the contractions, held Miranda's hand when she screamed, and kissed her forehead when Sophie finally arrived, a little bundle of damp curls and pink squirming limbs. I wept then, quietly, into my sleeve. From that moment on, I made Sophie part of my daily life. I volunteered to babysit 3 times a week when Miranda returned to work. I brought over meals so Miranda could sleep. When Sophie had colic, I took night shifts, walking the floorboards of their home until the baby's screams settled into soft hiccups. I never minded. I told myself this is what mothers do, what grandmothers should do. It's what I wished someone had done for me. But over time, things changed. The phone calls grew shorter. The visits began to feel like appointments rather than family time. I chalked it up to busy schedules, to Sophie growing up, to the world spinning faster. I didn't want to be the needy mother, the clingy grandmother. So I made myself useful instead. Every Saturday morning, I delivered fresh muffins, banana or blueberry, depending on the season. Every other Tuesday, I picked Sophie up from dance class. When Miranda and her husband Ryan wanted a weekend away, I rearranged everything to be there. Birthdays, I hosted, holidays, my kitchen fed them all. Still, my place in their lives began to feel auxiliary, like the supporting character who comes in for warmth and then steps back into the shadows. One time, maybe 5 years ago, I remember asking Miranda if Sophie might want to stay over for the night. I'd made up the spare room. I bought special pajamas with kittens on them. Sophie loved cats. Miranda had looked away. "I don't think so, Mom. She's got a lot going on." I smiled, as I always do. Of course, maybe next time. There wasn't a next time. I began to notice other things too, subtle cues that my presence wasn't quite wanted, though never directly stated. My casseroles were left untouched in their Tupperware. My questions were met with distracted nods. Miranda started calling less, and when she did, the conversations felt transactional. Logistics, schedules, pickups, drop-offs, nothing more. I tried not to take it personally. They were a family, and families get busy. I told myself this so often it became a prayer I said over empty coffee cups. But prayers, like hopes, eventually start to crack when repeated into silence. Still, I showed up. Because showing up is what I've always done. It's who I am, the dependable one, the steady one, the one who doesn't make a fuss. So when Sophie's 10th birthday rolled around, I did what I always do. I prepared. I wrapped a present with paper printed with golden stars and tied it with a satin ribbon. Inside was an album I'd spent weeks compiling, photos of every trip, every sleepover, every zoo visit, every silly face. It was a timeline of a relationship I thought mattered. I slipped in a note on the first page. To Sophie, from the woman who's loved you since the minute you arrived. Love, Grandma. I didn't want to cry as I wrote it, but I did. The party was at their house, newly renovated, pristine, and echoing with the voices of a crowd I barely recognized. There were parents from Sophie's school, neighbors, colleagues of Miranda's. A caterer walked around with little trays of puff pastry swirls. The backyard had a bouncy castle. Balloons in every pastel shade floated lazily in the breeze. I arrived 10 minutes early, as always. Miranda opened the door. "Oh, Mom, good. You made it." Her tone was off, not cold, but not warm either, like I was the UPS delivery person dropping off a parcel. I offered her the gift. She took it without looking at the label. "Sophie's outside with her friends. We're about to do a group photo. Uh, could you grab a quick shot for us?" I nodded. "Of course." We walked to the yard. I saw Sophie from afar, laughing, spinning, that wide-mouthed joy that only children seem to carry so freely. I waited for her to see me, to run over. She didn't. Miranda clapped her hands. "Okay, everyone, let's get the real family together." I stood behind her, slightly to the side, unsure what she meant. Then someone, Ryan's mother, I think, said, "Yes, let's have one with Mom, Dad, Sophie, and Grandma Linda." Someone handed me a phone. "Could you press the button, Joan?" I stared at them, this perfect tableau of togetherness, and something inside me slipped, not snapped. That would be too loud. It was quieter than that. A turning off, a closing. I took the photo, framed it carefully, pressed the button. Then I stepped back. No one noticed. The album was still under my arm. The morning of Sophie's birthday had started like most others, quietly. I woke at 6, as I always do, and stood for a moment by the window, watching the light sift through the trees. There was a softness to the air that day, a kind of gentleness that made me think it might be a good one. I had spent the previous week preparing, not just the album, though that had taken the most care, but also the clothes I would wear, the small lemon tart I had baked just in case, and the little speech I rehearsed in my head, something warm and brief. Not a toast, exactly, just a few words about love and memories. I even took extra care curling my hair that morning, and I pinned on a small gold brooch that once belonged to my own mother. But none of that seemed to matter. The moment I handed over the phone and pressed the shutter button for the photo, I knew something had shifted. It wasn't the request itself. It was how natural it seemed to them to exclude me. The phrase, "the real family," echoed faintly, even after I'd stepped away. I stood there, still holding the album, watching them cluster together under the balloon arch. Miranda with her careful smile, Ryan with his arm around Sophie, and Linda, Ryan's mother, whose presence had quietly overtaken mine over the years. Linda hosted barbecues, organized holiday crafts, and posted every gathering online with hashtags like 3 generations of love. There had never been a hashtag for me. As they laughed and adjusted poses, I moved to the side of the yard. No one followed. I sat at one of the smaller tables near the fence and placed the gift gently beside me. A little girl I didn't know, probably a school friend, asked if I was someone's grandmother. I nodded. Yes, I am. But the answer felt strange in my mouth. Eventually, people began moving toward the patio where the cake was waiting. Sophie ran ahead, her braids bouncing. I watched as she hugged Linda's waist and leaned into her. I don't know why it surprised me, but it did. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. No one noticed that I wasn't with them. No one called me over to sit, or to sing, or to light candles. Miranda looked across the crowd once or twice, but never searched for my eyes. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and picked up the album. There was a moment, a sliver of hesitation, as I looked back toward the house. The sun was catching on the window glass, turning it into a sheet of gold. From inside came the buzz of conversation, the rustle of party decorations, the clink of cake knives against porcelain. I turned and walked through the side gate. The sound of the party faded with each step down the sidewalk. I didn't cry. I felt strangely calm, almost weightless, like the world had confirmed something I hadn't wanted to believe. At home, I set the album on the kitchen counter. I didn't open it. I placed the lemon tart in the fridge and went upstairs to take off my shoes. My feet ached, and the brooch had come loose. I undid my hair, washed my face, and changed into a soft old sweater. Then I sat down at the dining table and stared at the silent phone. I didn't know then that I wouldn't speak to them again for weeks. I just knew I couldn't be the one to reach out. Not this time. An hour later, I slipped the album into a drawer, the one where I keep old letters, unused greeting cards, and a pair of Sophie's baby socks I'd never been able to throw away. Then I turned off the ringer on the landline. I didn't unplug it. I wasn't angry, just finished. It rang that night. I heard it from the hallway, muffled, distant. Then again the next day, and the day after. Eventually, it stopped. There was something freeing in the silence. At first, it felt unnatural, like I was playing a part. But soon, it began to settle into my bones. I made tea in the mornings without checking the clock for pickup times. I cooked meals just for myself. I sat on the porch with a book and didn't think about what they needed or forgot to ask for. For the first time in years, my time was my own. Still, there were moments of ache. I found myself setting out 2 plates by habit. I folded an extra towel for Sophie, even though she hadn't stayed overnight in years. I checked the weather before remembering I no longer needed to prepare for drop-offs. In the quiet, I started writing things down, just for myself. I wasn't angry. I wasn't trying to make a point. I just needed to see it all, laid out plainly. How many afternoons I'd spent in the school pickup lane, waving at Sophie through the window. Hundreds. How often I'd brought soup when she was sick. How many birthday decorations I'd cut out with aching fingers the night before the party. Too many times to count. So I wrote it out. School pickups, probably close to 500. Sick days sat through, at least 15. Homemade dinners delivered, hundreds. Emergency sewing projects, poster boards, forgotten lunches rescued, endless. And next to that, another list started forming without me meaning to. Thank yous. I couldn't remember any. Invitations to school plays or recitals, maybe once or twice, and always with a day's notice. Times someone asked if I was doing okay. I honestly didn't know. Looking at it on paper, I didn't feel righteous. I felt quiet, not invisible, because I was there. I had always been there. But maybe that was the thing. I had made myself so reliably present that I became part of the furniture, background, noise. It wasn't about guilt. It was about understanding. The truth wasn't that I had disappeared. It was that I had never really been seen. Not fully. Not in the way that mattered. I kept the lists in a notebook. Sometimes I added to them. Sometimes I didn't. but they gave shape to a feeling I'd carried for too long. One evening, about a week after the party, I lit a candle and sat by the window, watching the wind toss the neighbor's wind chime. It was a cool blue evening, the kind that reminds you that seasons change whether you're ready or not. That was the night I searched for something online. I didn't know what exactly, just the vague urge to find something outside of myself, outside of them. The phrase I typed was simple: mentoring for girls, volunteer. I didn't know then that a single click would change everything. The morning after the party, the house was too quiet. Not peaceful, empty. I walked through the kitchen as if someone else had just left it. The mug on the counter still had yesterday's tea bag in it. The tart I'd baked for Sophie was sitting in the fridge untouched. I didn't take it out. I didn't even open the fridge. The air felt heavier than usual, like the walls were holding their breath. I sat down in my chair, the one by the window, and rested the photo album on my lap. I didn't open it. I couldn't. It felt like something sacred, something too full of memories that now stung instead of comforted. The ribbon around it had loosened. I tightened it without thinking. No one knocked. No one called. Not that morning, not that afternoon. When the sun went down, I turned the porch light off early, a small, wordless way of saying, "Not tonight." The next day, the phone rang. I looked at it. The caller ID said Miranda. I let it go. It rang again later that evening. This time, it was Ryan. I didn't answer. By the third day, the calls had started to spread out. One in the morning, one at night. Voicemails that I didn't listen to. I didn't want apologies. I didn't want explanations. I wanted stillness. And in the stillness, I found something else. There were parts of my life I hadn't touched in years. A drawer full of fabric I always meant to sew. Books with bookmarks halfway through. Letters from friends I had lost track of. I found a box of postcards I once collected. Sunsets, beaches, old American diners. One card had a quote on it. "Sometimes you have to step outside to see the frame." That stuck with me. I started going for walks in the morning, just around the block at first, then farther. I found a new rhythm: wake, tea, a walk, something small for lunch, maybe an old film in the afternoon. I stopped checking the phone altogether. If someone really needed me, I figured they'd knock. They didn't, and I didn't fall apart. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the notebook again, the one where I kept the lists. But this time, I didn't write anything. I just looked at the pages, then flipped to a clean sheet and wrote a single question at the top. If I'm not their grandmother, who am I? It hung there, staring up at me like a challenge. Not bitter, just honest. I sat with it for a long time. Eventually, I answered myself with something that surprised me. I don't know yet, but I think I'd like to find out. That night, I clicked the link I had bookmarked. A mentoring program for girls in foster care. I'd found it the week before, but hadn't had the courage to fill anything out. The idea felt too big at the time, too different, but now I didn't feel different. I felt ready. I filled out the form. It asked about my experience, my strengths, my interests. It felt strange to talk about myself in those terms, but it also reminded me that I was a person outside of holidays and casseroles and rides to school. I hit submit and closed the laptop. 2 days later, I got an email. They wanted to schedule a phone interview. I almost didn't respond. But something in me, something quiet but firm, told me to follow through. The call was simple. A woman named Karen spoke to me. She asked thoughtful questions. I told her about raising my daughter alone, about how I used to help my granddaughter with her reading, about how I wanted to feel useful again. At the end of the call, she said, "You're exactly the kind of person we hope for." It was the first time in a long time someone had said that. I didn't cry. I just closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you," into the quiet kitchen air. That was the beginning of something. Not a replacement, Not a fix, but a beginning. The next Monday, I received a folder in the mail. Inside was a schedule, a mentor handbook, and a short letter with a single name written in careful penmanship. Elena, age 11. My hands trembled just slightly as I held the paper. I didn't know what she'd be like. I didn't know what I'd be like either. But I knew this: I was going to show up. Just like I always had. Only this time, maybe someone would see it. The silence wasn't empty. It had shape, texture, weight. It took a few days for me to notice that it was no longer just the absence of noise. It was the beginning of something else. At first, I felt its sharp edges, walking past the phone without flinching, skipping my usual glance at the calendar for Sophie's school events, not buying strawberries because they were Sophie's favorite. But then it softened. I started waking up without the jolt of responsibility. No rush to prepare breakfast for someone else. No mental checklists for drop-offs or weekend projects. I sat on the porch with my tea longer than usual. I listened to the wind more than the radio. It wasn't a retreat from life. It was the quiet return to my own. Still, the silence wasn't always kind. Some evenings, I'd find myself standing by the hallway closet, hand resting on the pink jacket Sophie left behind years ago. I hadn't been able to throw it out. It still smelled faintly like the shampoo she used back when I helped bathe her as a toddler. Something sweet and artificial and unforgettable. I never stayed there long, just long enough to remember what being needed used to feel like. Miranda didn't stop trying immediately. She called again the following weekend. I saw her name light up on the screen while I was folding laundry. I let it ring. An hour later, a message arrived. Can we talk? I don't know what we did, but we miss you. Sophie misses you. It didn't feel cruel. It felt confused. And maybe that was the hardest part of it all. Not that they meant harm, but that they'd never seen any of it. The hundreds of quiet acts, the invisible glue, the silent showing up. I didn't respond. I wrote instead. I made another list, but this one was different. I titled it, Things I Have Done That No One Noticed, Washed and Returned Every Dish They Forgot After Holidays Repaired. Sophie's torn backpack strap and never mentioned it. Picked up groceries they were too busy to grab. Cleaned their gutters one Saturday morning while they slept in. Took the late bus home so Ryan could have the car. Waited outside in the rain the year they were late to pick me up from Thanksgiving. The act of writing wasn't to wallow. It was to document, to say, I was here, I mattered, and yet a strange thought began to bloom. Maybe it was never about being thanked. Maybe the harder truth was that I'd built a life entirely around being useful, as if usefulness was the only way I deserved to be loved. Without it, I didn't know what to be. That realization stayed with me for days. I sat with it during walks. I stirred it into soups I cooked just for myself. I even carried it with me the first time I stepped through the doors of the community center to meet Elena. I hadn't expected much. I told myself not to. She was just a girl after all, a stranger. I wasn't trying to replace anything. Still, when she entered the room, thin arms crossed, chin lifted in cautious defiance, I felt something move inside me. Not longing, recognition. She sat across from me in silence for the first meeting, just picked at her bracelet and shrugged when I asked about her favorite subject in school. I didn't press. I simply told her a little about myself. Not the grandmother version, the Joan version. The person who loved old movies and used to sew her own dresses. The woman who once dreamed of learning Italian. The girl who never had a best friend. She didn't say much that day, but when the session ended, she lingered near the door and said, "You don't talk like the others." I smiled. "Neither do you." It wasn't a breakthrough. It was something gentler. A beginning once again. That evening, back at home, I walked past the drawer where Sophie's album still sat. I paused, not to take it out, but to pull open the space next to it. I placed a blank album there, a new one, the kind with thick pages and room to grow. It had no photos yet, but I wrote something on the first page. Elena, age 11, real. Elena and I met every Wednesday at 4. At first, it was just an hour in a bright room with mismatched chairs and posters on the wall that said things like, "You are more than your past, and be the person you needed when you were young." She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. We started with little things, drawing, word games. I brought in a crossword one day, and she rolled her eyes but did it anyway. I learned she liked spicy chips, hated group activities, and had a notebook she never let go of. A few sessions in, she brought the notebook out. She didn't hand it to me, just opened it, placed it between us, and turned it around. Stories, dozens of handwritten pages, some lined, some scribbled sideways across blank ones. Spies, orphans, twin sisters who escaped across mountains. Some pages were crossed out in thick black lines. Others had tiny drawings in the margins. None of it looked like schoolwork. It looked like survival. I read silently. She watched my face. When I was done, I looked up. "These are really good." She shrugged, but her shoulders were straighter. "Do you ever let anyone read them?" Number, they don't care. Well, I care. The next week she brought more, and the week after that, she let me copy a few so I could print them out. I brought them back in a plastic binder. Nothing fancy, but clean and neat, like something meant to be kept. I saw her mouth twitch when she held it. Back home, I did what I hadn't done in months. I opened the drawer, took out Sophie's album, not to cry, but to make space. I tucked Elena's binder beside it. Not a replacement, a continuation. Later that evening, I found myself printing a photo of us that the program director had taken. Just the two of us at a table, heads bent over a stack of papers. Elena's half smile, barely there but present. I slipped the photo into the first page of the blank album. Underneath, I wrote, "You are not extra. You are not background. You are not practice. You are the story." I didn't know what would come next, if she'd stick with the program, if her interest would last, if I was even making a difference. But for the first time in years, I wasn't measuring my value by how needed I was. I was showing up not because someone had asked, but because someone had never been asked at all. It wasn't revenge, it was reclamation, a quiet movement, just enough to remind myself that love doesn't disappear. It moves, it transforms, and sometimes it finds a place that finally holds it properly. It was subtle at first, not some dramatic transformation, just a sense that the girl who used to sit like a fortress had started leaving the gate cracked open. Elena began bringing her notebook without prompting. She started using pens instead of pencils. She even corrected me once when I misread a line in one of her stories. It wasn't rude, just certain. That certainty, I realized, was new. One afternoon, she asked if I'd ever wanted to write a book. I laughed before I could stop myself. "Once, I think, when I was your age." "What kind?" "I don't remember, but I always liked the idea of letters, that someone, somewhere, might read something I left behind." She nodded like that made sense. The next week, she handed me a folded page, not from the notebook. This one was separate, torn from a pad, and written in her neatest print. It started, "Dear Joan, sometimes I think you know what's hurting me without asking out loud. I don't even know how to say thank you, because no one's ever stuck around this long just to listen." There was more, but I couldn't read it all at once. I blinked hard and folded it back up. "I hope that's okay," she said. "It's not like a real letter." "It's more real than most things I've ever been given," I said. That evening, I came home and stood in my kitchen for a long time. My fingers hovered near the place where Sophie's drawings used to hang, crayon-sketched suns, lopsided hearts. a tree with her name under it in shaky capitals. I'd taken them down after her 7th birthday, quietly, without ceremony. I remember thinking she was growing up, that she'd want to see cleaner walls. But now I pinned Elena's letter to that same space, not out of nostalgia, not out of longing, but to honor something present, something alive. It sat there on its own, not surrounded by childish art, not framed in gold, just paper and words. But it changed the room. Later that week, I slipped a note into the back pocket of Elena's binder. I didn't sign it. You're already a writer. Writers tell the truth even when no one's asking. Keep going. She didn't mention it the next time we met, but she smiled when she opened the binder. I didn't need anything more than that. That same afternoon, after our session, I took the long way home, past the grocery store where I used to buy Sophie's favorite crackers, walked by the park where we once fed ducks. I didn't feel heavy with memory the way I used to. It wasn't grief anymore. It was space. And in that space, something had taken root. I wasn't a ghost in my own life. I wasn't proof of someone else's story. I was beginning my own. The letter stayed on the wall for weeks. Sometimes I caught myself reading it again as I passed. Not fully, just fragments. Other times I'd just rest my fingers against it, like checking to make sure it was still there, that it hadn't been imagined. Elena kept writing, not every week and not always as a letter. Sometimes it was a poem. Sometimes it was a story with a dedication. Once it was just a list titled Things I Didn't Say. Every page had her voice in it, raw, exact, and entirely her own. She didn't write for attention. She wrote like someone trying to breathe underwater. One day, she handed me a new folded paper. It was short. Sometimes I feel like you're the only grown-up who remembers how to sit still. I didn't ask what she meant. I knew. It wasn't about silence. It was about presence. I started keeping a small folder of her writings at home, separate from the program materials. I labeled it simply Elena. It sat on my desk beside my old sewing box and my tea tin. I added to it quietly, like planting seeds. With each new page, I noticed something I hadn't felt in years: pride without pain. There was no performance, no expectation, just the quiet gift of being trusted. I hung her list, the things I didn't say, next to the first letter. I didn't hang them as a display, but as reminders that words can build homes, that presence can take root, even in the absence of titles. Then, one afternoon, the phone rang. The house line. I hadn't heard it in over a month. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, staring at the blinking light. Voicemail. I didn't listen to it right away. I let it sit. 2 hours later, I sat at the kitchen table with my tea and pressed play. Hi, Mom. I don't know if you're still checking messages, but Sophie's been asking why you haven't called. She made a drawing for you. I left it in your mailbox. I didn't move, not right away. I stared at the phone. Then, slowly, I stood up, walked to the front door, and opened the mailbox. Inside, folded in half, was a sheet of pink paper. Sophie's handwriting, less wobbly now, read, Dear Grandma, I miss you. I'm sorry if we were weird. I hope you're okay. I made a bird for you. The drawing was of a small, lopsided robin, perched on a branch with blue leaves. No other message, no date. I carried it back inside. I didn't cry. I didn't hang it up either. I placed it in a drawer, not the one with Elena's things, not the one with old birthday cards. Just a drawer, neutral, uncommitted. That same evening, I wrote a letter. Not to Sophie, not to Miranda, to myself. Dear Joan, you are not just what they forgot. You are what you remembered. You are the warmth you carried, the time you gave freely. You are not erased. You are rerouted. I folded it, placed it beside the kettle, and left it there for the morning. The next day, at our usual meeting, Elena said she wanted to read something aloud. Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. It was a short story about a girl who built a nest out of old paper scraps, a place no one else knew about. Safe, secret, hers. At the end, the girl leaves a note in the nest. It says, "If you find this, it means I chose you." She looked at me after she read it, eyes steady. "I didn't write that for anyone at school," she said. "Just so you know." "I know," I said. I could tell. That night, I pinned the bird drawing to the side of the fridge, not to undo the past, just to say, I saw it. It was 3 weeks after the drawing appeared in my mailbox that Miranda showed up. No call, no warning, just a knock on the door in the middle of a quiet Thursday afternoon. I had just put on a kettle, was halfway through folding a basket of clean laundry, and wasn't dressed for company. Not that I would have changed anyway. When I opened the door, she was standing there with a look I hadn't seen on her face in years. It wasn't anger, it was confusion, maybe a little hurt, and something else. Something closer to the face I remembered from when she was 8 and didn't understand why I couldn't attend the school recital because I had an overnight shift. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside without a word. The kettle whistled in the background as she sat at the kitchen table. She didn't take off her coat. "I just," she began, but stopped, fidgeting with the cuff of her sleeve. "I don't know what we did, but Sophie's confused. And I'm confused. You just disappeared." I didn't speak right away. I poured tea for both of us and slid a cup in front of her. She didn't touch it. "I didn't disappear," I said. "I stopped standing in the background of a life I was told I belonged to." She blinked. I could see she wasn't prepared for that. "What does that mean?" she asked, genuinely. "You've always been there, a part of everything." "No," I said. "I've been near everything, but that's different from being seen, from being included." Miranda leaned forward. "We never meant to push you away. I mean, God, you're my mother." "That doesn't mean you looked at me," I said, and I felt the tremble in my throat, but I held it. "You called me when you needed something, a ride, a favor, a casserole, but not to ask how I was, not to share anything real. And that day, at Sophie's birthday," I stopped. She looked down. "I didn't make the list," I said finally. "Not the photo, not the chairs around the cake. I brought a gift that no one opened. I left, and no one noticed." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, "I thought you were just being helpful, that you liked being needed." "I did," I admitted, "because that was the only way I was allowed to stay." "I didn't know," she whispered. "I know," I said. The silence stretched, not painful, just raw. She wiped her eyes. "So, what now? You're mentoring some kid and we just become strangers?" I sat down across from her. "I'm not trying to replace anything, Miranda, but I'm not going back to being invisible. I have something now that I haven't had in a long time, someone who hears me when I speak, who values my time just because I'm giving it, not because they need something from me." "I never thought I made you feel that way," she said. "That's the problem," I said softly. "You never thought about it at all." She didn't argue. She looked older to me then, not tired exactly, but vulnerable in a way that reminded me of her as a girl, after a nightmare or scraped knee. "Sophie still talks about you," she said. "I still think about her," I said, "every day, but I won't beg to be part of her life. That's not love, that's survival." Miranda flinched slightly at that, but she nodded. "I'll try," she said, "to do better." "I believe you," I said. And I did, but I also didn't wait for it. When she left, she hugged me. I let her. She stood at the bottom of the porch steps for a long time before walking away. I stood in the doorway, holding the warm mug of tea I hadn't touched. Inside, the house felt no different. But I did. Not because we'd resolved everything, not because anything had magically repaired itself, but because, for the first time, she'd heard me, and I hadn't raised my voice to be heard. There's a quiet shift that happens when you stop chasing something, not the dramatic kind, not all at once, but slow and cellular, like your body remembers it doesn't have to brace anymore. That's how it felt after Miranda left. No grand resolution, no guarantees, but something had settled in me. I no longer checked my phone for messages that didn't come. I no longer kept Sophie's photo album on the top shelf, just in case. It stayed where it was, tucked away, preserved, but no longer an altar. There was freedom in that, not forgetting, just loosening. My world wasn't smaller. It had grown in a different direction. Every Wednesday with Elena now felt like a thread I didn't know I'd been missing. The kind of connection that was born not out of obligation or shared blood, but mutual recognition. I began to see how different that was, and how rare. One afternoon, the school invited mentors to attend a showcase of student work. Elena didn't tell me about it herself. The coordinator did, slipping me a flyer with my name handwritten in the top corner. Just so you know, she said, Elena submitted a story. I didn't ask which one. I just showed up. The event was held in a modest school gym, transformed with folding chairs, handwritten signs, and students buzzing in nervous circles. The walls were lined with easels and printouts, photos and illustrations. A microphone stood at the front, waiting. I found Elena's name halfway down the program. A short story, The Keeper of Quiet. When they called her, she walked to the mic with that same guarded poise she had the first time we met. But her voice was steady. She read slowly, clearly. A story about a girl who lives in a small town where people speak in endless noise, all rushing to be heard, but no one listening. The girl finds a hidden room behind her school library, filled with silence. Not emptiness, true silence where thoughts could breathe. She begins to visit it every day. One day, she brings a second chair. And someone came, she read, not with loud words, not with lessons, just with stillness. And the stillness made space, and the space made room for her own voice. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until she closed the final page. There was soft applause. A few students whistled. Elena stepped down and returned to her seat. When she passed me, she didn't say anything, but her hand brushed mine, and it was enough. Afterward, parents and mentors were invited to view the displays. I wandered through them like a visitor in a museum of adolescence. Hopes, heartbreaks, sketches, jokes scrawled in colored pencil. And then I saw it. Elena's story had been printed, bound, and placed on a stand with a placard. At the bottom was a small dedication for the one who showed me stillness. I stood there a long time. That night, back home, I opened the blank album again, the one I'd started for her. I slid in a copy of the story, printed from the school's site. Below it, I taped the event program. I added one more photo, just our hands, side by side on the table, from a candid the coordinator had taken months ago. Underneath, I wrote, not background, not invisible, witness. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew this. Whatever it was, I wouldn't be edited out. Not anymore. Maybe I wasn't in my family's photo albums. Maybe I never would be again. But I had a place, a role, one I chose, and more importantly, one that chose me back. Sophie turned 11 in late spring. I remembered the date without checking. It arrived like a quiet tide, familiar, steady, no longer painful, but never forgotten. This year, I wasn't invited, not even as an afterthought. There were no phone calls, no messages, no soft attempts. Miranda didn't show up again. Sophie didn't send another drawing, and I didn't wait by the phone. Instead, I made a plan. It was a Saturday. The weather was warm for May. Sunlight lingered on the edges of everything, and the wind was kind. Elena and I met in front of a small cafe she had once pointed out in passing. She liked the neon sign, she'd said it looked like a place where stories happened. I told her I'd take her there sometime. So I did. She wore a jean jacket and carried her ever-present notebook. I brought the envelope I had been saving for weeks. We ordered ice cream, 1 scoop each, nothing fancy. We sat outside on a bench by the window where we could watch people walk by. Elena liked watching people. She made up stories about them. A woman with 2 phones was an undercover agent. A man with a suitcase was running away from a wedding. After a while, she grew quiet. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded, then shrugged. "It's just weird sometimes to have someone show up and not leave." I didn't respond. I just nodded and handed her the envelope. Inside was the latest version of her story, The Keeper of Quiet, formatted like a real book. I'd worked with one of the volunteers at the center to typeset and print it professionally, bound with a soft gray cover and her name on the front. Just her first name, that's how she wanted it. She opened it slowly, like it might crumble in her hands. "This is mine," she whispered. "All yours," I said. "Every word." She didn't cry, neither did I, but we sat there quietly, as if the whole world had pressed pause to let her feel it fully. She flipped through the pages slowly, careful not to smudge anything. Then she asked, "Are you really not going to your granddaughter's party?" I smiled, not bitterly, not sadly, just honestly. "Number not this year." "Because you're mad?" "No," I said, "because I'm not invisible anymore, and I won't walk into a room just to feel erased." She looked down at the book again. "I'm glad you picked me," she said without looking up. I reached over and touched her hand. "No, Elena, you picked me. That's the difference." We stayed until the light began to shift. The shadows got longer. The cafe sign flickered as the sun sank behind the row of buildings. She kept the book clutched in her lap. Eventually, she stood, stretched, and said, "I think I want to write another one." "I think you will." That night back at home, I didn't open Sophie's drawer. I didn't look at old photos. I didn't feel the usual sting of what was missing. I made tea. I opened Elena's album. I added a photo we took outside the cafe, just the corner of her smile, and my hand on the table. And under it, I wrote, "Do you have a real family?" I stared at the question for a while. Then I answered in ink, below the photo. "Right now, yes. Because she chose me. And that makes it real."